When the Imperium of Man tore through the void and brought their endless war into a galaxy that still believed in balance, the Force itself recoiled. Their god was not a myth but a corpse on a golden throne. Their faith was absolute, their cruelty systematic, and they looked at the Jedi, the Sith, and every soul caught between them as something to be purified or destroyed. But behind the Imperium came something worse. Machines older than stars, waking from tombs beneath dead worlds with one purpose: the extermination of all biological life. Could a galaxy built on destiny and hope survive contact with civilizations that had abandoned both? Or would the light of 1,000 generations finally be snuffed out by those who worshipped only annihilation? The galaxy had known war for millennia, yet nothing in the archives of Ossus, the holocrons of Korriban, or the testimony of Force-sensitive chroniclers could have prepared the known systems for what erupted from the unknown regions in the year 3 ABY. A wound in space itself tore open between Sicilla and wild space, bleeding crimson lightning and toxic radiance that turned hyperspace lanes into killing fields. Ships emerged that were not ships, but floating fortresses encased in corrupted metal and human agony. Behind them came a tide of fury and doctrine so absolute that even the Sith paused in their machinations to witness what poured into the galaxy like poison into clear water. The Imperium of Man had arrived, and with it came the grim certainty that no philosophy of balance could survive their truth. Ilara Ven stood in the observation deck of the Galactic Archive vessel Testament of Worlds, her breath fogging the transparasteel as she watched the horizon shimmer with unnatural color. She was neither Jedi nor Sith, neither Imperial nor Rebel. She was an archivist, a neutral chronicler who had spent 30 years documenting the conflicts that shaped civilizations. Her grey robes bore no insignia, her datapad carried no allegiance, but her hands trembled now as sensors screamed warnings that made no sense. "Impossible," she whispered. The lead archivist, a Bothan named Resh Talvir, appeared at her side. His fur bristled with static discharge. "The hyperspace distortion is stabilizing. Whatever came through is establishing a beachhead in 17 systems simultaneously." 17? Ilara turned to him. "No fleet has that kind of coordination. This isn't a fleet," Resh's voice dropped. "It's an invasion on a scale our galaxy has never seen, and they brought their gods with them." Through the viewport, a vessel the size of a small moon drifted past, its hull crawling with Gothic architecture and weapon emplacements that could crack planets. Gilded aquilers gleamed across armor plating thick enough to shrug off turbolaser fire. Behind it came cruisers bristling with launch bays disgorging hundreds of smaller craft, each one marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. And beyond those, in the deeper, dark shapes moved that were not entirely real, flickering between dimensions like predators testing the boundaries of a new hunting ground. The Force screamed. Ilara gasped as psychic pressure slammed through her untrained sensitivity. She was no Force user, but every sentient being carried some fragment of connection to that living current. What she felt now was not the light or the dark. It was something worse, something hungry and laughing and utterly convinced of its own righteousness. Resh caught her as she staggered. "Are you... Get us out of here," she managed. "Archive Protocol Omega, record everything, and pray the Jedi figure this out before the Sith do." But it was already too late for either. On Coruscant, the Jedi Temple shuddered as Master Yoda clutched his gimmer stick, his ancient eyes squeezing shut against visions that flooded his consciousness. He saw armored giants 10 feet tall wading through laser fire, their ceramite plate reflecting blaster bolts as they chanted hymns of hatred. He saw witches suspended in flesh temples, screaming prophecies in languages that predated galactic civilization. He saw warp storms devouring suns and planets reforged into factory hells where enslaved billions labored until death. And beneath it all, he felt 4 presences that made even Palpatine's darkness seem like a candle before a supernova. Master Yoda? Mace Windu stood in the doorway of the meditation chamber, his hand already on his lightsaber hilt, We're receiving distress signals from the outer rim, entire sectors going dark. Yoda opened his eyes. Worse than the Sith, this is, much worse. A galaxy that has forgotten the Force itself, come to remind us what true war means. Mace's jaw tightened. What do we do? Prepare, we must. But fear, I do, that preparation will not be enough. Far from the core worlds, on the volcanic hell of Mustafar, Darth Vader stood in his meditation chamber as the dark side roiled around him. He had felt the disturbance hours before the Jedi, his connection to suffering and rage granting him insight that light-sided contemplation could never match. Through the Force, he perceived what the Imperium represented. A civilization that had weaponized dogma to a degree that made even Imperial indoctrination look gentle. He found it fascinating. Behind him, an Imperial officer cleared his throat nervously. Lord Vader, the Emperor requests your presence. There has been an incursion. I know, Vader's respirator hissed. And I know what we face. Tell the Emperor I am already en route to the rendezvous point. My lord, you haven't been briefed on. Vader raised one gloved hand, and the officer's words choked off in a strangled gasp. I need no briefing to understand war. That is all this galaxy has ever truly known. Now we shall see what happens when war meets those who have made it their only god. He released the officer, who crumpled gasping to the deck and strode toward his shuttle. Behind the mask, something that might have been anticipation flickered in what remained of Anakin Skywalker's ruined heart. In the outer rim, on a nameless agricultural world called Brentol IV, the first contact occurred not through diplomacy, but through annihilation. A Space Marine strike cruiser, the Hammer of Devotion, translated from the warp into real space above a world of golden fields and peaceful settlements. Its scanning arrays detected humanoid life, technological civilization, and no proper fear of the God Emperor. This was deemed heresy. Drop pods fell like burning meteors, each one carrying 10-foot-tall warriors in power armor the color of dried blood. When the doors blew open, the Adeptus Astartes emerged with bolters roaring and chainswords screaming hymns of purification. Local militia, armed with blaster rifles and courage, stood their ground for precisely 47 seconds before the slaughter began. Brother Sergeant Matthias of the Blood Ravens chapter advanced through a town square where market stalls still smoldered, his armor's auto-senses cataloging resistance and finding none worthy of the name. These people fought with discipline but no true faith. They wielded energy weapons but understood nothing of the machine god's blessing. They called upon no emperor, swore by no primarch, and died bewildered that righteousness had not saved them. This galaxy is weak. Matthias voxed to his squad. Their warriors possess skill but no conviction. Their technology is advanced but spiritually hollow. We shall bring them enlightenment through fire. A blaster bolt struck his pauldron, scarring the Aquila but failing to penetrate. He turned toward the source and saw a young woman in militia uniform, her weapon trembling but her stance firm. She shouted something about freedom and the new republic, words that meant nothing in High Gothic. Matthias raised his bolter and hesitated. In that half-second pause, he felt something he had never encountered in 100 battlefields across the Imperium. A current in reality itself, subtle yet vast, that seemed to flow through all living things. It touched his thoughts with neither blessing nor curse, simply observing with the patience of stars. His chaplain had warned of xeno-witchery and demon tricks. But this felt older than chaos, cleaner than the warp, and infinitely more dangerous because it asked questions rather than demanding obedience. The woman fired again. This time her shot went wide, and Matthias understood she was weeping even as she fought. The sight stirred something long suppressed beneath his indoctrination, a fragment of the baseline human he had been before the gene forges remade him. He lowered his bolter and activated the Vox. Captain Octavius, this is Matthias. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal pending proper reconnaissance. These people possess an unknown psychic phenomenon that may compromise operational security. The response was immediate and absolute. Denied. Compliance or death are the only acceptable outcomes. execute the Emperor's will. Matthias's finger tightened on the trigger, but the current he had felt surged stronger, carrying with it impressions of futures branching in infinite directions. In one, he pulled the trigger, and the woman died, and the Imperium claimed another world through blood. In another, he turned away, and questions bloomed that would eventually shatter certainty itself. He chose doctrine. The bolt round exploded through the woman's chest, and the Force recoiled as if struck. Across Brental IV, every Force-sensitive being for 500 kilometers felt the ripple of that death, not because it was crueler than any other, but because it had been committed with such absolute conviction of righteousness. The galaxy had known evil before, but evil that doubted itself, that wrestled with its own darkness. This was different. This was purity made monstrous, and it was only the beginning. Ilara's ship jumped to hyperspace 3 hours later, its databanks crammed with footage that would reshape galactic understanding forever. She watched the recordings with growing horror as Space Marine forces methodically purged settlement after settlement, each death accompanied by prayers that treated genocide as holy duty. There was no rage here, no sadistic pleasure, just the calm certainty of faithful servants performing necessary work. "They don't even hate their victims," she whispered to Resh. "They pity them." Is that better or worse? She had no answer. The Testament of Worlds made for the nearest New Republic outpost, but hyperspace itself had become unstable. Warp rifts bled into real space at random intervals, spewing psychic radiation that drove astromech units mad and gave nightmares to even the most psychically null crew members. Twice they were forced to revert to real space to recalibrate, and each time Ilara saw the evidence of the Imperium's expansion. Worlds burned, station debris tumbled through void, and in the distance, Chaos warships prowled like predators, their hulls decorated with symbols that seemed to writhe when viewed directly. On the second stop, they intercepted a distress signal. Fonda shipyards. Overwhelmed. Astartes boarding parties. Entire defense fleet. Emperor preserve us. Resh's ears flattened. Fondor, that's a core world. Not anymore. Ilara brought up the tactical display, and both archivists stared in silence. The Fondor system, which had been building star destroyers for the Empire and now the New Republic, had been completely overrun. 6 Space Marine strike cruisers held position above the orbital yards, while drop pods rained onto the planet's surface. But worse than the military assault was what followed. Massive cargo haulers descending to strip the factories of materials, Mechanicus priests crawling over Imperial technology like scavengers, and worst of all, vast slave coffles being marched onto transport ships. "They're not just conquering," Resh breathed. "They're harvesting." A new voice crackled through the comm. "Unidentified vessel. This is Commander Bly of the 327th Star Corps. Evacuate the system immediately. The Jedi Council has declared Fondor a contested zone." Ilara's hands flew across the controls. "This is the Testament of Worlds, neutral archive vessel. We carry refugees and documentation. Requesting safe passage to..." "Negative. The Jedi have engaged the invaders. Clear the battlefield or be caught in the port." The transmission cut off in a wash of static. Through the viewport, Ilara saw them. A dozen Jedi starfighters screaming toward the Astartes cruisers, their S-foils locked in attack position. Leading them was a modified Eta II Actis painted in the colors of the Jedi Temple, its trajectory steady and true. Even across the vacuum, Ilara felt the determination radiating from its pilot, a presence in the Force like a lighthouse against gathering storm. Master Shak Ti had come to Fondor with 3 Jedi Knights and a squadron of clone pilots, all of them veterans of the Clone Wars who understood that sometimes peace could only be preserved through strength. She had watched the reports from Brental IV, had meditated on the visions flooding through the Jedi network, and had reached a terrible conclusion. These invaders respected only Force and would interpret mercy as weakness. The Force would have to prove otherwise. "All wings, report in. she commanded, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting across every sensor. "Remember your training. These ships are heavily armored but respond to standard fighter tactics, target weapons emplacements, and engine clusters. May the Force be with you." "Copy that, General," came the responses from pilots who had fought separatist droids and lived. They would not survive the next 10 minutes. Shaak Ti led the attack run herself, her Actis weaving through flak fire that turned space into a storm of shrapnel and plasma. The Space Marine cruiser Hammer of Devotion loomed ahead, its broadside batteries tracking her approach with inhuman precision. She reached into the Force, letting it guide her movements, and felt the familiar flow of prescient combat awareness that had saved her life 1,000 times. Then she felt something push back. A psychic pressure slammed against her Force sense like a fist through silk. It came from the cruiser itself, from something aboard that resonated with power yet carried none of the Force's living warmth. Shaak Ti gasped as her precognition shattered, replaced by howling static and half-glimpsed visions of an entity that laughed in languages predating galactic civilization. A Chaos sorcerer aboard the Hammer of Devotion had sensed her probing and retaliated. All craft, evasive. The cruiser's lance batteries fired, spears of concentrated energy that moved at light speed and required no targeting solutions. 3 Jedi starfighters simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. 2 more took glancing hits that sent them spinning into Fondor's gravity well. And Shaak Ti's Actis lurched as something invisible seized it, crushing inward with telekinetic force that had nothing to do with the light or the dark. This was the warp given form, and it wanted her dead. She flooded her consciousness with the Force, drawing on decades of training to center herself against the psychic assault. Light met chaos in the space between heartbeats, and reality itself groaned at the collision. For just an instant, the sorcerer aboard the cruiser felt genuine surprise. This witch, this primitive Force wielder, possessed a connection to the immaterium that was both pure and impossibly disciplined. She drew on the warp without succumbing to its corruption, a feat that should have been impossible. The surprise lasted exactly long enough for Shaak Ti to break free. Her Actis rolled hard to port as another lance strike carved through the space she had occupied, then dove beneath the cruiser's belly where point defense turrets couldn't track effectively. She armed her proton torpedoes and reached out through the Force, seeking the ship's vulnerable points not through engineering knowledge but through the living awareness that connected all things. There, the reactor's secondary cooling array, a cluster of vents tucked beneath overlapping armor plating, a target that should have been impossible to hit from her angle and approach vector. But Shaak Ti was a Jedi master, and the Force cared nothing for probability. She fired. The torpedoes curved in flight, guided by will and physics in equal measure, and punched through the venting system into the cruiser's power core. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then light erupted from within the Hammer of Devotion as plasma containment failed, and ancient mechanisms designed to withstand centuries of war finally met their limit. The cruiser broke in half, both sections tumbling toward Fondor in flames. Shaak Ti allowed herself one breath of relief before realizing she had made a terrible mistake. The psychic backlash of 1,400 Space Marines dying simultaneously hit every Force-sensitive being in the system like a tsunami of fury and betrayal. These warriors had died certain of their righteousness, convinced that the God Emperor would welcome them, and their collective rage at being denied that reunion tore through the Force with apocalyptic violence. Shaak Ti screamed as her mind was filled with visions of a golden throne, an empire spanning millions of worlds, and a faith so absolute that it made the Jedi Code seem like a child's philosophy. Then the visions changed, and she saw the Imperium's other face. She saw forge worlds where children labored until their hands bled. She saw penal legions driven into battle by commissars who shot deserters without trial. She saw inquisitors burning entire populations on suspicion of taint. She saw servitors, human bodies lobotomized and grafted to machinery, performing tasks that droids could have done while retaining nothing of their souls. and she understood that the Imperium was not evil because it relished cruelty. It was evil because it had systematized suffering and called it holy. The Force wept. Shakti pulled her starfighter into a desperate climb, but her hands shook too badly to maintain control. Around her, the few remaining clone pilots called for status updates she couldn't answer. The psychic assault had left her concussed in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. She needed help. She needed. A presence touched her mind, cold and vast and utterly certain. "Land on Fondor," a voice said through the Force. "The 501st will secure you, and I will show these invaders what true power means." Darth Vader had arrived. His superstar destroyer, the Executor, translated from hyperspace at the edge of the system, flanked by a battle group of star destroyers whose combined firepower could glass continents. On the bridge, Admiral Piet stood rigid as his lord and master reviewed tactical displays with the calm focus of a predator selecting prey. "The Jedi engaged without proper reconnaissance," Vader observed. "Predictable. My lord, we have the Astartes fleet in bombardment range. Should we—" "No." Vader turned from the displays. "I will handle the ground assault personally. You will provide orbital support and ensure no Imperium reinforcements enter the system." "And Admiral?" "Yes, my lord. Capture at least one of their ships intact. I wish to understand what manner of faith drives such fanaticism. It may prove useful to the Empire." Piet swallowed. "As you command." Vader swept from the bridge, his cape billowing like a shadow given weight. Behind him, officers exhaled in relief at his departure and immediately began calculating the odds of surviving the coming battle. On the deck below, 6 Lambda-class shuttles prepared to launch, each one carrying a platoon of the 501st Legion's finest stormtroopers, along with weapons and armor that had been blessed by the dark side itself. But Vader would lead the assault alone. His shuttle descended through Fondor's atmosphere as anti-air fire from both Imperium and New Republic forces turned the sky into a light show of destruction. Neither side targeted him directly. The Astartes recognized the shuttle's Imperial classification and assumed reinforcements. The New Republic defenders assumed the Empire was responding to the invasion. Both were partially correct. Vader cared nothing for the New Republic or the Imperium. He cared only for testing his power against warriors who claimed to serve an immortal god. If this emperor of theirs was truly eternal, then perhaps Vader might learn something useful about transcending death. And if not, then the Imperium would discover what happened when blind faith met the dark side of the Force. The shuttle touched down in Fondor's capital city, which had become a war zone of rubble and blood. Space Marines held the government district against New Republic militia, who fought with desperate courage and inadequate equipment. Vehicles burned, buildings collapsed, and through it all, the Astartes advanced with the methodical precision of machines wrapped in human flesh and fanaticism. Vader's boots hit the pavement, and the Force rippled outward like a shockwave. Every combatant within 200 meters stopped fighting. New Republic soldiers stumbled as an invisible weight pressed against their minds. Space Marines paused mid-stride as their psycho-conditioning encountered something it had no framework to process. And in the ruins of a cathedral, a chaplain named Erebus felt his faith waver for the first time in a century as he perceived a darkness that made the warp seem tame by comparison. Vader ignited his lightsaber, and its crimson blade cast bloody light across the devastation. "I am Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith," he announced, his voice carrying through the Force and amplified across every comm channel in the city. "You have invaded a galaxy that belongs to the Empire. Surrender, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and I will show you what true power means." Brother Captain Titus of the Ultramarines stepped forward from his squad, his stormbolter aimed at Vader's chest. He was a veteran of 3 centuries of warfare, a warrior who had fought demons and Xenos and heretics beyond counting. He had stared into the eye of terror and emerged unbroken. But looking at Vader, he felt something he had not felt since his neophyte days. genuine uncertainty. This being radiated wrongness on a fundamental level, as if reality itself recoiled from his presence. And yet there was discipline here, control, a mastery of whatever power he wielded that spoke to training and will rather than demonic possession. Titus consulted his internal lexicon of xeno threats and found no match. "We serve the God Emperor of mankind," Titus replied, his voice filtered through his helmet's vox grill. "We recognize no authority but his. Surrender yourself for purification or be destroyed." Vader tilted his head. "Your Emperor is not here. I am." He raised one hand, and Titus flew backward, as if struck by a Titan's fist. The Ultramarine crashed through a building's wall, his ceramite armor cratering stone, and lay stunned as rubble rained down. His squad opened fire immediately, their bolters roaring on full automatic, but the mass-reactive shells froze in midair 3 meters from Vader and hung suspended like insects in amber. Vader clenched his fist. The bolt rounds reversed direction and slammed back into the Space Marines who had fired them. Ceramite cracked. Power armor systems screamed warnings. And 2 of the Emperor's finest fell, crippled by their own ammunition turned against them through impossible sorcery. The remaining Ultramarines drew combat blades and charged, their training overriding shock. They had fought Chaos Sorcerers before, had learned to close distance quickly and trust in faith and steel. But this was not the Warp's chaotic madness. This was precision. This was control refined to an art that made even their genetic enhancements seem crude. Vader's lightsaber moved in patterns too fast for human eyes to follow, but Space Marine autosenses were not human. They tracked his blade, calculated intercept angles, and adjusted ceramite-reinforced gauntlets to parry an energy weapon that physics said they should never survive touching. The lightsaber carved through combat blades like they were parchment. An Ultramarine's hand tumbled to the ground, still gripping the hilt of a weapon blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Another lost his entire arm at the shoulder, the lightsaber cauterizing as it cut, preventing even the Astartes' enhanced healing from responding quickly enough. And a third lunged with desperate courage directly at Vader's chest, only to find himself lifted by an invisible hand and held suspended while the Dark Lord studied him like an insect. "You are enhanced," Vader observed, his respirator hissing steadily. "Gene-forged, perhaps. But you lack connection to the Force. You are powerful, yet blind, like battle droids with biological components." The Space Marines snarled something in High Gothic that Vader's suit translated as a prayer curse. Vader found it tedious. He crushed the warrior's throat with a thought and let the body fall. Titus emerged from the rubble, his armor sparking but functional, and witnessed the slaughter of his brothers with mounting rage. This witch, this demon sorcerer wearing human skin, had killed Ultramarines with contemptuous ease, had violated the sanctity of the Emperors chosen with powers that reeked of the Warp yet operated with none of its madness. "Abomination!" Titus roared, and triggered his jump pack. He launched skyward in a burst of promethium flame, then dove toward Vader with his thunder hammer raised high. The weapon crackled with disruptive energy fields designed to shatter daemon flesh and fortress walls alike. One strike would pulverize even this sorcerer's unnatural defenses. Vader caught the hammer's haft one-handed. The impact crater extended 10 meters in every direction as kinetic force met immovable will, but Vader's arm did not break, did not even buckle. He stood rooted in the Force itself, drawing on the dark side's infinite well to anchor his presence in reality with unshakable permanence. Titus strained against the grip, his armor's power systems redlining, his genetically enhanced musculature tearing itself apart with effort. The hammer did not move. "You have faith," Vader said quietly, his respirator the only sound in the sudden stillness. "I respect that. But faith without power is merely noise. And you have no power here." He ripped the hammer from Titus's grasp and hurled it through a building. Then he lifted Titus into the air and held him there while the Force probed the Space Marine's mind, peeling back psycho-conditioning and genetic loyalty to examine the architecture of the Imperium's faith. What Vader found there both impressed and disgusted him. These warriors had been brutalized from childhood, subjected to surgical modification and psychological conditioning that made Imperial Academy training look gentle. They had been shaped into living weapons, with no purpose beyond war and service. In many ways, they reminded Vader of what he himself had become. "You deserve better than this," Vader told him, and meant it. "But I cannot offer you freedom, only death with dignity." He snapped Titus's neck with a thought and let the body fall. Around him, the battlefield had gone silent. New Republic troops stared in horror at the casual brutality. Remaining Space Marines reassessed their tactical position and found it catastrophic. And somewhere above, aboard the remaining Imperium vessels, commanders struggled to classify what they had witnessed. Psyker, Daemon Prince, Xeno Abomination. The classifications all felt inadequate. Vader deactivated his lightsaber and turned to the New Republic forces. "Evacuate your wounded and withdraw. This world is now under Imperial protection." A militia captain found his voice. "We're not your subjects, Sith." "No, but the enemy of my enemy will live to oppose me another day. Go, before I change my mind." They went. As the last transport lifted off, Vader stood alone in the ruins and reached out through the Force, letting his consciousness expand across the battlefield. He felt the dying, the terrified, the faithful on both sides. And beneath it all, he felt something else, something vast and patient and utterly alien to the Force he had known for 40 years. The warp pressed against reality, testing it, searching for cracks. Vader smiled behind his mask. Finally, an enemy worthy of testing his full power. But on Coruscant, the Jedi Council convened in emergency session, their faces grim as reports flooded in from across the Outer Rim. 15 worlds had fallen to Imperium forces in 3 days. The casualty count exceeded anything seen since the Clone Wars. And worst of all, the Force itself seemed to be changing, recoiling from the psychic pollution the warp spread wherever Chaos forces manifested. Yoda tapped his gimmer stick against the chamber floor, and the assembled masters fell silent. "A choice, the galaxy faces," he said quietly. "Stand divided and fall, or unite against a threat that makes Sith and Jedi seem as children quarreling. Speak with the Empire, we must, and pray that pride does not doom us all." Master Mace Windu clenched his jaw but nodded. "I'll contact Vader. Force help us." "Already it has tried," Yoda replied, "and found us wanting." Elara watched from orbit as the Testament of Worlds recorded everything, her databanks filling with footage that would define galactic understanding for generations. She had documented the Clone Wars, the rise of the Empire, the birth of the Rebellion. But this was different. This was not political conflict or philosophical disagreement. This was a collision between fundamentally incompatible realities, and she had no idea if either would survive. Resh appeared at her shoulder, his datapad glowing with preliminary analysis. "I've been cross-referencing their symbols with our xenoarchaeology databases. Some of their iconography predates our recorded history." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they might be telling the truth. This emperor of theirs, this faith they serve, it could be older than the Jedi, maybe older than the Force itself, at least as we understand it." Elara looked out at the stars, at the galaxy she had spent her life chronicling, and felt very small. "Then document everything," she said. "Because if we fall, someone needs to remember that we existed, that we tried to be more than weapons and dogma." She paused. "That we tried to be human." Resh nodded and returned to his station, leaving Elara alone with the weight of witnessing. Below, on Fondor's surface, Vader stood in the ruins and waited for the galaxy to realize what he already knew. This war would not be won with lightsabers or blasters or even the Force itself. It would be won by whoever could endure the longest, sacrifice the most, and emerge with some fragment of their humanity intact. And Vader had abandoned his humanity long ago. The stars turned overhead, indifferent to the suffering below, and the first battle of a war that would reshape existence itself came to its bitter close. But in the unknown regions, vast beyond imagining, the rest of the Imperium prepared to advance. Entire chapter fleets, Titan legions, guard regiments numbered in the billions. And behind them, drawn by the scent of fresh souls and undefended reality, the forces of chaos gathered like sharks sensing blood. The Force shuddered. Across the galaxy, Force sensitives from Dathomir to Ilum woke screaming from nightmares of a future written in skulls and fire. Jedi masters meditated for hours and found only silence where the light had always answered. Sith lords laughed and felt their laughter turn hollow as they realized the darkness approaching made their ambitions seem quaint. And in the Emperor's throne room on Coruscant, Darth Sidious sat in shadows and smiled, because chaos was opportunity and opportunity was power, and these invaders had brought enough of both to drown the galaxy. He reached for his communicator and sent a single encrypted message to his most trusted agents. Study them, learn their weaknesses, and prepare the contingencies. If the Imperium seeks to replace one empire with another, they will discover what happens when the dark side truly awakens. The message vanished into the holonet, and the Emperor returned to his meditations, already planning how to turn catastrophe into dominion. Far from Coruscant, on the fungal forests of Myrka where the Force grew quiet and strange, a Mandalorian clan leader named Rava Ordo watched the stars and counted the ships passing overhead. She recognized Imperial Star Destroyers and Rebellion cruisers, all heading toward the same contested regions. But she also saw vessels that matched no database, ships that looked like cathedrals welded to warships, and her warrior's instinct recognized kindred spirits. These invaders understood that survival required strength, that honor meant nothing without victory, that the galaxy belonged to those willing to take it. The Mandalorians had learned these lessons through centuries of bloodshed. Perhaps it was time to teach them to newcomers, or learn if the invaders could teach something new in return. She activated her helmet's comm. Gather the clans, all who can fight. We're going hunting. Across Mandalorian space, the call went out, and thousands of warriors prepared for battle with the same joy their ancestors had felt facing the Jedi. This was what they had been born for. This was their purpose. And if they died, they would die as Mandalorians, which was all any warrior could ask. The convergence accelerated. Within a week, 17 major battlefronts erupted across the galaxy as Imperium forces pushed deeper into contested space. The New Republic, still recovering from the Empire's collapse, found itself fighting a two-front war against both Imperial remnants and Astartes' crusades. The Jedi Council struggled to coordinate a defense while maintaining their principles. And the Sith watched and waited, content to let others bleed while they accumulated power. But in the depths of the unknown regions, something stirred that cared nothing for politics or philosophy. The Necrons had awakened. Ancient beyond the Imperium, older than the Khaten themselves in this galaxy's history, the Necrons had slumbered through millennia of organic warfare with supreme indifference. But the warp's intrusion into real space set off proximity alarms in tomb worlds that had lain dormant since before the Rakatan Infinite Empire. Ancient protocols activated. Canoptech constructs began repairs, and in the deepest vaults, overlords who had seen the universe born and die opened eyes of emerald fire. They scanned the galaxy and found it infested with biological corruption. This would require extermination. Elara received the first reports of Necron awakening while the Testament of Worlds orbited a research station near Cecilla. The data made no sense. Ships that moved faster than light without hyperspace, weapons that disintegrated matter at the atomic level, and constructs that rebuilt themselves from catastrophic damage with mechanisms that violated every principle of physics her education had taught. "How many?" she asked Resh. "Unknown. The scanning data suggests at least 40 tomb worlds have activated, if even a fraction of their estimated populations wake fully." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Elara pulled up historical records, cross-referencing every legend and myth about ancient machines that predated galactic civilization. She found scattered references in Jedi holocrons, warnings in Sith archives, and fragmentary stories from cultures that had vanished long before the Republic rose. All of them spoke of mechanical gods that slept beneath worlds, waiting for organic life to prove worthy of existence. None of them suggested organics had ever passed that test. "We need to warn someone," she said. "Who?" "The Jedi are fighting the Imperium. The Empire is fighting everyone. The New Republic barely controls its own territory. And you want to tell them that robot skeletons are waking up to kill all biological life?" "Yes." Resh's fur stood on end. "They'll think we've gone mad. Then we'll have company." Ilara began composing messages to every faction, every government, every organization that might listen. Most would ignore her. Some would mock her. But if even one commander took the warning seriously and prepared defenses, it might save billions. It was all she could do. As her messages scattered across the holonet, the first Necron harvest fleet emerged from beneath the surface of a forgotten world called Zolan. Monoliths rose from stone like towers of living metal, their Gauss cannons tracking biological signatures with contempt that transcended emotion. Scarab swarms poured from dimensional gates, their programming simple and absolute: consume biological matter, reduce complexity, restore silence. A trading convoy from Zolan's capital city encountered them first. 20 cargo haulers carrying agricultural products and civilian passengers simply vanished as Gauss beams stripped them molecule by molecule, leaving nothing but quantum echoes, no debris field, no escape pods. Just emptiness where life had been. The Necrons advanced toward the city. On Coruscant, the Jedi Council received Ilara's warning 3 hours after the Zolan massacre. Master Ki-Adi-Mundi read the report twice, cross-referenced it with archival data, and looked up with genuine fear on his usually calm face. "This isn't hyperbole," he said quietly. "The Necrons are real, and if they've truly awakened, then we face extinction," Mace Windu finished. "Not conquest, not conversion, complete erasure." Yoda closed his eyes, reaching through the Force for guidance, and finding only the vast patience of something that had waited millions of years and could wait millions more. The Necrons existed outside the Force's normal flow, neither light nor dark, but something beyond such primitive dichotomies. They were silence given form, entropy made beautiful, and they would not stop until the galaxy returned to the perfect quiet of the grave. "Unite, we must," Yoda said. "Imperium, Empire, Republic, all who draw breath. Or separate, we die." It was the first time in 1,000 years that the Jedi Council had called for total war. The message went out on every channel, every frequency, encoded in every language the Jedi archives contained. It was brief and absolute. "All sentient species face extinction. The Necrons have awakened. We must stand together or perish separately. This is not negotiation. This is survival. Rendezvous coordinates attached. May the Force be with us all." The response was immediate and chaotic. The New Republic accused the Jedi of collaborating with the Empire. Imperial admirals demanded clarification before committing forces. The Mandalorians wanted proof. And the Imperium, when they finally decrypted the message, responded with a single line: "We serve the Emperor. All other concerns are secondary." But then, a Space Marine librarian attached to the 12th Crusade fleet reviewed the data on Necron capabilities and felt his psychic senses recoil. These constructs were not alive in any sense the warp recognized. They existed in real space alone, immune to demonic possession, untouchable by sorcery, and utterly without souls to corrupt or save. They were everything the Imperium feared most: an enemy that could not be purified, converted, or broken through faith. The librarian's report reached the Crusade Command, was escalated to the Segmentum Authority, and eventually arrived at the High Lords of Terror themselves. Debate raged across command networks that spanned light years. Some argued that the Necrons were xeno-abominations to be destroyed alongside all other threats. Others noted that fighting a three-way war against the Necrons, this galaxy's native forces, and the warp itself guaranteed total defeat. Pragmatism won by a single vote. The Imperium agreed to a temporary ceasefire with the Jedi and New Republic, contingent on immediate action against the Necron threat. The Empire was not invited to negotiate, as the Imperium had classified them as proto-chaos cultists who worshipped a false emperor. This classification was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Palpatine's nature, but led to darkly amusing results. When Darth Sidious learned that someone considered his empire insufficiently tyrannical, he responded by dispatching 3 inquisitors to demand an apology. They never returned. The rendezvous point was a neutral world called Sanctuary, chosen for its remote location and complete lack of strategic value. Here, in a prefabricated conference dome erected overnight by Republic engineers, the most powerful beings in 2 galaxies gathered to decide the fate of trillions. On one side sat the Jedi Council, Yoda, Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Shaak Ti, who had survived Fondor through a combination of skill and fortune. Their robes were simple, their weapons holstered, but their presence in the Force radiated determination. On the opposite side, Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines, flanked by Librarian Tigurius and a full honor guard of Terminators whose armor bore scars from battles against demons and worse. They had demanded the right to bear arms, citing religious necessity, and the Jedi had reluctantly agreed. Between them, New Republic diplomats, Mandalorian representatives, and one very nervous Imperial emissary who kept glancing at the Jedi as if expecting treachery. And watching from orbit, Darth Vader, aboard the Executor, his consciousness extending through the Force to monitor every word spoken below. The Emperor had forbidden his direct participation, fearing the Imperium would recognize Vader's corruption and attack. But Vader had no intention of obeying if the negotiations threatened Imperial interests. Shaak Ti spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of recent trauma. "We face a threat that cares nothing for our differences. The Necrons will exterminate all organic life if given the opportunity. Our only chance is unified action." Calgar's response was immediate and harsh. "We do not negotiate with witches and heretics. We came only to assess if you possess any strategic value worth preserving." Mace Windu's hand tightened on his lightsaber hilt, but didn't draw. "You've seen what we can do. Jedi and Force wielders have capabilities your Imperium lacks. We can coordinate across distances, perceive threats before they manifest, and inspire hope in populations you would simply brutalize into compliance." "Hope is irrelevant," Calgar said flatly. "Only faith and firepower matter." "Then you're doomed," Mace replied. "The Necrons can't be intimidated by faith or overwhelmed by firepower alone. They've been winning wars since before your Emperor was born." Tigurius raised one gauntleted hand before Calgar could respond. The librarian had been scanning the Jedi throughout the meeting, probing their psychic signatures with techniques that bordered on heresy. What he found troubled him deeply. "Chapter Master," he said quietly, "they speak truth. The entities they call Necrons possess technology that predates the Dark Age. And these Force wielders, whatever their nature, can perceive phenomena our augurs miss. Pride will not serve us here." Calgar glared at his librarian but nodded fractionally. He had led the Ultramarines for centuries through discipline and pragmatism, not blind fanaticism. If the situation demanded cooperation with witches, he would cooperate, and then purge them after the Necrons fell. "Very well," he said. "Propose your alliance." For 3 hours they debated strategy, logistics, and the fundamental question of whether species who disagreed on the nature of reality itself could fight side by side. The Jedi advocated for defensive containment of Necron tomb worlds. The Imperium demanded overwhelming assault, followed by planetary exterminatus. The New Republic wanted to attempt communication, and the Mandalorians simply wanted to know where the fighting was thickest. They reached a compromise that satisfied no one: combined strike forces targeting confirmed Necron awakening sites, with Jedi providing reconnaissance, Imperium forces serving as primary assault elements, and New Republic fleets managing logistics and evacuation. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only plan anyone could agree on. As the meeting adjourned, Shaak Ti found herself standing beside Tigurius on the dome's observation platform, looking up at stars that seemed less friendly than they had a week ago. "Your power," Tigurius said without preamble. "It resembles the warp yet operates through different principles. How is this possible?" Shaak Ti considered her response carefully. "The Force is the energy of all living things. It connects, surrounds, penetrates the galaxy. We draw on it through meditation and discipline. No rituals, no sacrifices, no pacts with entities in the immaterium. Never. The Force requires only openness and respect. Never. Never." Tigurius's psychic hood flickered with barely suppressed energy. "Impossible. All psychic power stems from the warp. What you describe would require an entirely separate dimensional substrate, and that would contradict everything the Imperium understands about reality." "Then perhaps," Shaak Ti said gently, "the Imperium's understanding is incomplete." For a long moment, Tigurius stood silent, wrestling with implications that threatened his entire worldview. If the Force existed independent of the warp, then the Imperium's monopoly on truth crumbled. If psychic power could be wielded without corruption, then the black ships and the Astronomicon and the 10,000 years of suffering that sustained the Emperor might be unnecessary. The thought was too dangerous to pursue. "Guard your souls, Jedi," he said finally. "The warp is patient. It will find you eventually." "And what will you do when it doesn't?" Shaak Ti countered. Tigurius had no answer and withdrew, leaving the Jedi Master alone with questions neither galaxy could yet answer. Above, Vader watched the exchange through sensors and force perception, his mechanical mind processing data at speeds no organic brain could match. He saw the patterns forming, the alliances and tensions that would define the coming war, and he saw opportunity. If the Imperium and Jedi exhausted themselves against the Necrons, the Empire could sweep in and claim both galaxies. If Chaos forces followed the Imperium through the dimensional breach, Vader might learn to harness warp power and transcend his dependence on the Force. And if all else failed, he would survive as he always had, through ruthlessness and the absolute certainty that power justified its own exercise. He reached for his communicator. "Admiral Piet, prepare the fleet for deployment to Necron-contested space. We will observe the coming battles and intervene only if Imperial interests are threatened." "My lord, the Emperor ordered us to avoid direct engagement with—" "The Emperor is not here. I am. Proceed." Piet's acknowledgement was resigned. He had learned long ago that questioning Vader led only to pain. As the Executor began its slow burn toward the unknown regions, Vader allowed himself a moment of anticipation. Whatever came next would test every assumption both galaxies held about power, faith, and the nature of reality itself. He intended to be present when those assumptions shattered. The first combined strike force assembled at Bothawi 3 days later, a motley collection of Republic cruisers, Imperium troopships, and Mandalorian frigates that had no business operating together. Command authority was unclear. Communication protocols incompatible. And fundamental disagreements about acceptable casualties made coordinated fire support nearly impossible. They jumped to hyperspace anyway, because the alternative was watching the Necrons harvest worlds unopposed. Their target, the tomb world designated Kethri 9, located in the unknown regions near the convergence point. Preliminary scans suggested a relatively small awakening, perhaps 20,000 Necron warriors and minimal Canoptech support. A raid in force could theoretically disable the tomb before its full complement activated. They arrived to find 100,000 Necrons already active and a monolith defense network that turned local space into a killing field. The Imperium troopship Righteous Fury took the first hit, its void shields collapsing under focused Gauss fire that carved through armor plating like tissue. Half the ship's crew died in the initial barrage. The rest evacuated into boarding pods and dropships, committing to the assault because retreat meant spacing themselves, and Astartes did not retreat. Jedi starfighters wove through the defensive fire with force-guided precision, their pilots drawing on prescience and reflexes to survive targeting solutions that should have been impossible to evade. But there were too many weapons and too few Jedi. One by one, the starfighters fell, their pilots dying with shock that meditation had not saved them. The Necrons cared nothing for the Force. Mandalorian assault ships pushed through the carnage using speed and unpredictability, their pilots flying patterns too chaotic for even Necron calculation matrices to predict perfectly. They reached the tomb world's surface and deployed warriors who howled ancient battle cries and opened fire with every weapon they possessed. For 3 glorious minutes, the Mandalorians held their ground. Then the monoliths teleported in. Rava Ordo watched through her helmet's HUD as reality tore open and disgorged constructs the size of buildings, each one radiating emerald death. Her clan scattered immediately, training overriding shock, but Gauss beams found them anyway. Warriors who had survived 100 battles simply ceased to exist, their atoms scattered across the battlefield. She activated her jetpack and launched skyward, spiraling through Gauss fire while targeting the nearest monolith's power matrix. Her missile struck true, detonating against shields that barely flickered. The monolith rotated to face her, its optical sensors focusing with patient malice. Rava prepared to die well. Then Brother Captain Marcus of the Blood Angels crashed into the monolith from above, his thunder hammer wreathed in disruptive fields and the fury of 10 millennia of warfare. The impact crater extended 50 meters. The monolith staggered, its ancient mechanisms groaning as ceramite met living metal. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. The monolith rebuilt itself in 3 seconds, its self-repair protocols restoring integrity faster than Marcus could strike again. It rotated smoothly and fired, point blank, at a target too close to evade. Marcus raised his storm shield and channeled every ounce of his enhanced physiology into surviving. The Gauss beam struck, molecular disintegration meeting ceramite and adamantium and the fury of Sanguinius's gene suns. The shield held. Marcus held. And then Jedi Master Kit Fisto arrived, his lightsaber carving through Necron warriors with aquatic grace, while the Force itself seemed to surge around him. He had volunteered for this mission over the Council's protests, arguing that the Jedi needed to prove their worth to allies who valued only strength. Now he fought not for proof, but for survival. "Mandalorian," he shouted to Rava. "Disengage and regroup at the landing zone. We'll cover your withdrawal." "We don't retreat," Rava snarled back, already loading fresh ammunition. "You'll die." "Then we die as warriors." She opened fire on a fresh wave of Necron infantry, her blasters tearing through living metal that reformed almost as quickly as it fell. Kit Fisto wanted to argue but recognized the futility. These Mandalorians possessed the same stubborn honor as the Jedi themselves, the same conviction that some things mattered more than survival. He could respect that even as he cursed it. He turned back to the monolith and reached deep into the Force. The living Force flowed through all things, connecting atoms and stars with equal intimacy. Kit Fisto had spent decades mastering its currents, learning to perceive the connections that bound existence together. Now he extended that perception toward the monolith, seeking the threads of energy that powered its horrific weapons. He found nothing. The monolith existed in real space alone, powered by mechanisms that predated and transcended the Force entirely. It was a hole in the galaxy's living energy, a void that consumed without being consumed. Kit Fisto's concentration wavered, and the monolith fired. He raised his lightsaber in a desperate parry, letting the Force guide his blade into the Gauss beam's path. Emerald energy met cyan plasma in a collision of physics and impossibility. For one eternal second, the beam curved around the lightsaber, deflected by magnetic fields and Force-enhanced reflexes working in concert. Then the beam adjusted its frequency and resumed firing. Kit Fisto died instantly, his body disintegrating from the molecular level upward. His last thought was surprise that death could come so easily to a Jedi Master. His last emotion was regret that he would not see Coruscant's oceans again. The Force wept for his passing, but could not prevent it. Marcus saw the Jedi fall and felt something crack inside his psycho-conditioning. These people, these Force wielders the Imperium dismissed as witches, had fought and died alongside the Astartes with courage that matched any space marine, and the galaxy had responded by erasing them as if they had never mattered. For the Emperor and the Fallen, Marcus roared, and threw himself at the monolith again. This time, Rava joined him, her jetpack screaming as she dove toward the construct's sensor cluster. This time, a dozen Mandalorians added their firepower, concentrating on the same point Marcus struck. And this time, the monolith's shields wavered as accumulated damage exceeded repair threshold. The construct exploded in a pillar of emerald flame. Rava landed beside Marcus, both warriors breathing hard, and for a moment they stood as allies without qualification or doubt. "Your name, Mandalorian?" Marcus asked. "Rava Ordo. Yours?" "Brother Captain Marcus, 7th Company, Blood Angels Chapter." He paused. "Your courage honors the battlefield. You're not bad yourself, for someone who worships a corpse god." The words should have been an insult, but emerged as respect. Marcus laughed, a sound his chapter serfs would have found shocking. Perhaps there is more common ground than doctrine allows. Then the entire tomb world shuddered as something massive awakened beneath the surface. A Necron overlord emerged from dimensional gates, flanked by Lich Guard whose hyperphase swords could cut through tank armor. The overlord stood 3 meters tall, its body wrought from living metal so ancient it remembered the war in heaven. Optical sensors that had witnessed the Katon's rise now focused on the biological corruption infesting its tomb. It spoke in a voice like grinding stone, the words translated by Necron acoustic protocols into 1,000 languages simultaneously. "Biological entities. You trespass. This is unacceptable. Prepare for sterilization." Above the tomb world, the fleet battles had devolved into desperate holding actions. New Republic cruisers exchanged fire with Necron vessels that rebuilt faster than turbo lasers could destroy them. Imperium strike cruisers rammed tomb ships when ammunition ran low, their crews embracing martyrdom with prayers on their lips, and Mandalorian raiders darted through the chaos, searching for any weakness to exploit. They found none. The Necrons possessed technology millions of years more advanced, tactics refined across cosmic epochs, and the infinite patience of the undying. They did not tire, they did not fear, they did not question. They simply killed, methodically and eternally, until biological contamination ceased. Aboard the Testament of Worlds, Elara recorded every moment of the slaughter with tears streaming down her face. She had witnessed war before, but never this. Never such absolute disparity between forces, such utter futility in the face of ancient hatred. "We have to do something," she whispered. Resh's ears were flat against his skull. "We're archivists, observers. We don't intervene. We're also sentient beings watching genocide. And what would you have us do? Ram a Necron battleship? That would accomplish nothing except adding our deaths to the tally." Elara had no answer, so she did the only thing she could. She kept recording, preserving the evidence that these people had lived and fought and died believing they could make a difference. It would have to be enough. On the surface, the Overlord advanced through defenders who threw themselves against its guard with suicidal determination. Mandalorians and Astartes fought side by side now, their differences forgotten in the face of extinction. Blasters and bolters roared in concert. Thunder hammers struck in rhythm with Beskad blades. And still the Necrons came, an inexorable tide of emerald death. Marcus's armor was breached in 7 places, his enhanced blood leaking despite his multi-lung and Laraman cells working overtime. Rava's jetpack was destroyed, her left arm broken, but she kept fighting because Mandalorians did not surrender. They would die here. Both knew it, both accepted it. Then the Force itself convulsed, and reality tore open as Darth Vader arrived. His shuttle had penetrated the orbital battle through a combination of Imperial codes and Force-enhanced stealth, descending to the surface while every combatant focused elsewhere. Now he stood on a ridge overlooking the carnage, his cape billowing in toxic wind, and assessed the tactical situation with the cold precision that had made him the Empire's most feared commander. The Necrons were winning through technological superiority and numerical advantage. The Allied forces were heroic but doomed. Standard doctrine would be to withdraw and establish defensive positions. Vader had never cared for standard doctrine. He raised both hands, drawing on the dark side with an intensity that made nearby combatants stagger. The Force responded with terrible eagerness, flooding through him until his cybernetic components screamed warnings and his organic remains burned with power. He shaped that power into a single focused intent and unleashed it. The Necron Overlord froze as invisible pressure crushed its chassis from all directions simultaneously. Living metal groaned. Power conduits ruptured. And for the first time in millions of years, the Overlord experienced something approaching surprise. This biological creature possessed power that transcended its primitive form, that reached into dimensions the Necrons had abandoned as inefficient. It was impressive. It was also insufficient. The Overlord's self-repair systems compensated for the damage faster than Vader could inflict it. Its Lich Guard teleported to flank positions around the Sith Lord, their blades raised to strike. And from orbit, tomb ships began targeting Vader's position with the same Gauss weapons that had shattered cruisers. Vader released his Force grip and ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade casting bloody light across his mask. "I am Darth Vader," he announced, his voice carrying through amplified speakers and the Force alike. "And I do not accept defeat." The Lich Guard attacked in perfect synchronization, their hyperphase swords moving through dimensions to bypass conventional defenses. Vader met them with a technique he had perfected over decades: precognitive combat awareness combined with absolute mastery of Form V. His lightsaber moved in patterns calculated to intercept attacks before they manifested, his cybernetic reflexes pushing beyond organic limits. 3 Lich Guard fell in the first exchange, bisected by strikes too fast for their matrices to process. 2 more followed, their ancient bodies tumbling in pieces. But the last one's blade found its mark, phasing through Vader's lightsaber guard to strike his chestplate. Alarms screamed as the hyperphase sword passed through armor and machinery, phasing partially into Vader's organic remains, pain unlike anything he had felt since Mustafar erupted through his nervous system. His life support systems flickered, and for one terrible moment, Vader felt mortality return with absolute clarity. Then the dark side surged through him like lightning through a conductor. He grabbed the Lich Guard's sword arm with his left hand and crushed it, not through strength, but through Force-enhanced molecular disruption. Living metal crumbled to powder. The Lich Guard staggered, its programming unable to process such fundamental violation of physics. Vader decapitated it and turned to face the Overlord. "Your weapons are impressive," he said, his respirator laboring. "But you lack understanding of power's true nature. You are machines pretending to be gods. I am a god pretending to be a machine. We are not the same." The Overlord tilted its head, optical sensors analyzing this absurd biological creature that refused to die efficiently. It ran probability calculations and determined that conventional assault would eventually succeed through attrition. This Vader possessed finite energy reserves and was already damaged. Victory was mathematically certain. The Overlord raised its staff of light and prepared to demonstrate why biological arrogance always failed against Necron supremacy. Vader struck first. He reached into the Force and pulled, not at the Overlord's physical form but at the dimensional substrate around it. The Force permeated all things, even those that did not acknowledge its existence. Vader had learned to manipulate that truth to devastating effect. Now he twisted reality itself, creating a localized distortion that warped space-time around the Overlord. The ancient construct found its limbs moving through molasses, its weapons aiming at angles that defied geometry, its sensors reporting data that could not be reconciled. Vader walked forward calmly, his lightsaber held in a two-handed grip. "You have fought for millions of years," he said. "I have fought for 40. But I learned something you never did, how to make the universe hate you as much as you hate it." He drove his blade into the Overlord's core. Crimson plasma met living metal and energy matrices that had survived since the war in heaven. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Overlord's self-repair systems attempted to compensate for molecular disruption at the quantum level, encountered the Force's fundamental wrongness from their perspective, and collapsed into cascade failure. The Overlord disintegrated from the inside out, its ancient consciousness fragmenting across probability streams as it desperately sought a future where it still existed. It found none. Vader stood among the ruins of the Necron's greatest warrior and allowed himself one breath of satisfaction. Then the Tomb World's primary power source detonated, its containment fields failing as critical systems went offline. The entire planet began to collapse. "All forces, withdraw immediately," Marcus voxed across every channel. "The tomb is destabilizing." Rava grabbed the nearest wounded Mandalorian and activated her backup jetpack, ascending on stuttering thrusters, while the ground beneath her feet shattered into fissures of emerald energy. Around her, Astartes and New Republic troops scrambled for evacuation shuttles that were already taking fire from orbital tomb ships. Too many wouldn't make it. Vader stood motionless, calculating optimal escape vectors while his damaged life support systems struggled to maintain function. He could reach his shuttle before the final detonation, but the Allied forces, these brave fools who had fought beside him without understanding what they served, would die in the thousands. For a moment, Vader felt the ghost of Anakin Skywalker stir. He reached into the Force and created a barrier, an invisible shield that held back planetary collapse for precious seconds while the last evacuation shuttles cleared the surface. It cost him everything. His cybernetic components overloaded, his organic heart nearly stopped, and the dark side drank from his suffering with the eagerness of a vampire. But the shuttles escaped. As Vader's own transport lifted off, the tomb world exploded in a pillar of green fire that was visible from 3 star systems away. 100,000 Necrons died instantly, their consciousness matrices scattered beyond any hope of reconstruction. The few survivors retreated into deeper tombs, already calculating new awakening protocols that would account for biological forces capable of Force manipulation. The Allied fleet withdrew in ragged formation, their crews exhausted and traumatized. They had won, technically, 1 tomb world destroyed, 1 Necron awakening stopped. But the cost had been catastrophic. 60% casualties, 3 Jedi dead, an entire Mandalorian clan wiped out, and Chapter Master Calgar seriously wounded by Gauss fire that would leave him in a dreadnought sarcophagus for a century. It was the most Pyrrhic victory any of them had ever experienced, and there were 40 more tomb worlds to go. Aboard the Executor, medical servitors worked frantically to stabilize Vader's systems while the Dark Lord lay perfectly still, conserving energy. His conscious mind drifted through the Force, examining the battle from every angle, searching for lessons that would prevent such losses next time. What he found disturbed him. The Necrons were beatable, but only through tactics the Empire had never prioritized: cooperation, sacrifice, and faith in something beyond mere survival. The Jedi possessed that faith naturally. The Imperium had twisted it into fanaticism. But the Empire, Vader's Empire, ran on fear alone. Fear was insufficient against enemies who had transcended death itself. He would need to evolve. The Empire would need to change, or they would fall as thoroughly as the Necrons had once fallen, leaving only ruins and warnings for future species to ignore. The thought should have filled him with determination. Instead, it filled him with something he had not felt in decades: doubt. On Coruscant, the Jedi Council convened in emergency session, their faces grim as casualty reports accumulated. 3 Masters dead, 17 Knights wounded or missing. And worst of all, confirmation that the Force itself seemed powerless against Necron technology. "We cannot win this war through strength of arms alone," Mace Windu said quietly. The Necrons are too advanced, too numerous. We need a different approach. Diplomacy? Ki Adimundi suggested without conviction. With machines that view biological life as contamination? No. We need to understand them, find their weaknesses, and that requires resources the Jedi Order does not possess alone. Yoda's ears drooped. Mean this, you do. Work with the Empire itself. Yes. The chamber fell silent as every council member grappled with implications that violated centuries of Jedi teaching. The Empire was evil, the Emperor was Sith, Vader was a murderer and tyrant. Everything the Jedi stood for demanded they oppose such darkness. But opposing the Empire while fighting the Necrons meant certain defeat for both. Shakti spoke into the silence. I fought beside an Astartes on Kethri 9, a space marine who worships a god I do not believe in, who serves an empire built on brutality I find abhorrent. But he fought with honor, and he died saving people he had no reason to care about. She paused, gathering herself. If we can stand with the Imperium, we can stand with the Empire. Not because we approve, but because the alternative is extinction. And dead Jedi can't bring justice to anyone. Mace wanted to argue but found no counterpoint. The logic was inexorable and terrible. Yoda tapped his Geimer stick against the floor. Contact the Emperor, we must. May the Force forgive us for what we are about to do. The message reached Darth Sidious while he meditated in his throne room, and the Emperor's laughter echoed through empty halls. The Jedi, those self-righteous fools who had opposed him for decades, now crawled to him for help. It was delicious, it was perfect, and it would serve his plans beautifully. He activated his communicator and composed a response that dripped with false magnanimity. I accept the Jedi's proposal for cooperation against the Necron threat. All resources of the Empire will be made available for our mutual defense. In return, I require only one small concession. The Jedi Order will formally acknowledge the Empire's authority and submit to Imperial oversight of all future operations. Mace Windu received the message and wanted to destroy his communicator. He's extorting us. Of course he is, Shakti replied. He's Sith. Did you expect charity? We can't agree to this. It would make us complicit in every atrocity the Empire commits. And refusing means the Necrons harvest the galaxy unopposed. Choose, Master Windu. There are no good options left. Mace looked to Yoda, hoping for wisdom that could navigate this impossible situation. The ancient master met his gaze with eyes that had seen the Republic rise and fall, that had witnessed the Sith return and the Jedi all but destroyed. Agree, we must, Yoda said quietly. But remember, I do, that even in darkness, choice remains. Serve the Empire, we will. But serve the light first. And when this war ends, judge us the Force will, by what we preserved rather than what we sacrificed. It was the best answer anyone could offer. Mace sent the acceptance message and felt a piece of his soul die with it. Within a week, the first combined Imperial Jedi task force assembled at Kuat Drive Yards, an armada of Star Destroyers and Republic cruisers operating under unified command for the first time since the Clone Wars. Stormtroopers trained alongside clone veterans, Jedi Knights coordinated with Imperial intelligence, and in the shadows, Inquisitors watched everything, cataloging names and abilities for future purges. But beneath the surface cooperation, deeper changes stirred. Astartes librarians began studying the Jedi's connection to the Force, searching for techniques that might shield against chaos corruption. Jedi Masters examined Imperium tactics for insights into fighting enemies immune to Force persuasion. And Mandalorians, pragmatic as always, simply recruited from both sides, accepting any warrior who could pull a trigger and die well. The galaxy was learning to fight as one, but the question remained, would it be enough? In the unknown regions, the Necrons adapted their awakening protocols. Tomb worlds that had planned to activate sequentially now synchronized their emergence. Fleet assets that had been held in reserve deployed en masse. And in the deepest vaults, weapons that had last been used against the old ones themselves came online with targeting solutions already calculated. The war was about to enter its second phase. And this time, the Necrons would not underestimate biological resistance. Ilara watched from the Testament of Worlds as both galaxies marched toward catastrophe, her archives filling with documentation that might be all that survived when the dust settled. She had spent her entire life recording history. Now she documented what might be history's ending. Resh found her in the observation deck, staring at stars that seemed dimmer than they had before the war began. "We should leave," he said gently. "Get beyond the outer rim and wait this out. And abandon the record? Let whatever happens go undocumented? We can't document anything if we're dead." Ilara turned to him. "Then at least we'll die doing what we believed in. That's more than most can say." Resh's ears flattened, but he nodded. They would stay. They would record. And if the galaxy fell, someone in the distant future might find their archives and learn from the mistakes that doomed civilization. It was a thin hope, but hope nonetheless. Far from the battlefronts, on a forgotten moon orbiting a dying star, something stirred that had been waiting since before the Necrons slept. The Celestials, the architects who had shaped the unknown regions eons ago, had left fail-safes against apocalyptic threats. Now those fail-safes activated, ancient stations powering up with energy drawn from dark matter and cosmic strings. They scanned the galaxy and found it infested with war. This was acceptable. War had been the Celestials' purpose, their art form elevated to cosmic necessity. But this war lacked elegance. It was crude, desperate, and worst of all, it threatened to damage the infrastructure they had built across millennia. That was unacceptable. Deep in the moon's core, quantum processors began calculating intervention strategies. They evaluated the Imperium and found them useful but limited. They assessed the Necrons and recognized kindred philosophy. They observed the Force wielders and perceived potential for transcendence. Then they made a decision that would reshape everything. They would offer each faction a choice: surrender their individuality and join the Celestial Collective, gaining immortality and purpose beyond petty survival, or continue fighting and face systematic extermination by forces that made the Necrons look gentle. The messages went out across subspace, bypassing conventional communication, speaking directly to the conscious minds of leaders across every faction. And the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see who would choose oblivion and who would choose to become something beyond human, beyond machine, beyond the Force itself. On Coruscant, Yoda received the celestial message and wept, because he understood what it represented: the final test of whether organic life deserved to persist. The Force had warned of this moment in prophecies so ancient they predated the Jedi Order. Now the choice had arrived, and there were no good answers. Aboard the Executor, Vader listened to the celestial ultimatum and felt something like admiration. These beings understood power without illusion, strength without mercy. They were what the Empire should have been, what he himself aspired to become. He almost accepted. Then he remembered Padme and Ahsoka, and the moments when he had been Anakin Skywalker and believed that love mattered more than power. Those memories were corrupted and distant, but they remained, anchored in the ruins of his heart. He rejected the Celestials and prepared for war against gods. In the Imperium's command network, the High Lords of Terror debated the offer for 17 seconds before unanimous rejection. The Emperor had sacrificed everything to preserve humanity's independence. Accepting assimilation now would betray 10,000 years of suffering. They would fight, and they would die free or not at all. The Mandalorians didn't even discuss it. Rava Ordo simply transmitted her response across all celestial frequencies. "We are Mandalorians. We bow to no one. Come and face us if you dare." And the Necrons, those ancient machines who had rejected the flesh the Celestials still valued, responded with the closest thing their kind possessed to amusement. They had fought the Old Ones and survived. They had battled the Khand and won. These Celestials, powerful though they were represented just another obstacle to be overcome. The war expanded. Now, 4 factions battled for survival across a galaxy that could barely sustain 2. The Imperium, the Necrons, the allied Jedi Empire Republic coalition, and the Celestials, each convinced of their own righteousness, each willing to sacrifice everything for victory. And in the spaces between, in the cracks and shadows where no faction held dominion, the Chaos Gods watched with infinite patience and growing hunger. The war pressed against reality with increasing pressure, seeking entry points, testing boundaries, whispering promises to anyone desperate enough to listen. This galaxy had known war before, but never like this. Never on this scale, with these stakes, against enemies that represented fundamentally incompatible visions of existence itself. The Force screamed, the warp laughed, and the stars began to die, one by one, as powers beyond mortal comprehension turned the galaxy into their battlefield. Elara recorded everything, her hands steady even as her hope crumbled. She documented the first celestial station activating, its weapons capable of unmaking planets with a thought. She recorded the Necron response, millions of warriors emerging from tomb worlds simultaneously. She captured the Imperium's desperate defense, space marines fighting with the fury of the doomed, and she witnessed the Jedi and Sith, ancient enemies, standing side by side against forces that made their conflict seem trivial. Resh stood beside her, his fur gray with stress. This is the end, isn't it, of everything? Maybe. Or maybe this is the crucible that forges something new, something that can survive what's coming. You actually believe that? Elara looked at him, at her friend of 30 years, and found honesty. No, but I'm going to record it anyway, because that's what we do. We remember, we witness. And maybe, somewhere in the distant future, someone will find our work and do better. Resh's ears lifted fractionally. Then we'd better make it a good recording. They returned to their stations, 2 archivists among trillions, and did the only thing they knew how to do. They documented the galaxy's ending so that its beginning might be remembered. On distant battlefields, heroes fought and fell. Jedi Masters dueled Necron overlords while reality cracked around them. Space Marines charged celestial constructs with prayers and fury. Sith Lords wove darkside rituals that held back the warp's corruption for precious hours. And Mandalorians, those eternal warriors, proved that courage meant something even when victory was impossible. Vader stood in the ruins of what had been the Fondor shipyards, his armor scarred by ghost fire and celestial energy, and looked up at stars that flickered with unnatural colors. He had spent 40 years accumulating power, conquering worlds, breaking anyone who opposed him. And it had all been meaningless, a child's game compared to the forces now arrayed against existence. He should have felt despair. Instead, he felt freedom. For the first time since Mustafar, Vader understood that power had limits, that strength could fail, that even the Force itself could be overwhelmed. And in that understanding, he found something he had thought lost forever: the ability to choose based on what mattered rather than what succeeded. He activated his communicator. All Imperial forces, this is Lord Vader. New operational directive: protect civilian populations above all other objectives. The Empire will be judged not by what we conquered, but by what we preserved when preservation became impossible. Execute immediately. Across the fleet, officers stared at their consoles in shock. This was not the Vader they knew, not the tyrant who killed for failure or mercy alike, but the order stood, authenticated and absolute. They obeyed. And on 1,000 worlds, Imperial forces shifted from offense to defense, using their strength to shield the weak rather than dominate them. It would not win the war, it might not even matter, but it meant something to those who lived because stormtroopers stood between them and annihilation. The Jedi felt the shift through the Force and wondered if they had misjudged Vader's capacity for redemption. Yoda sensed it most clearly, his ancient perception tracking every ripple in the cosmic tapestry. Changed, he has. Not redeemed, not saved, but choosing better, he is, than before. Hope that gives, small, but real. Mace Windu wanted to argue, but found no ground to stand on. They were all making impossible choices now. At least Vader's latest choice saved lives instead of taking them. It would have to be enough. The war ground on, consuming systems and souls with equal indifference. But here and there, in moments too small for grand strategy to notice, people helped each other. Astartes carried wounded Jedi to safety. Republic medics treated Imperial soldiers. Mandalorians taught civilians how to fight and survive. And slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to remember that it was more than weapons and doctrine. It was people, flawed, desperate, but still trying. The Celestials noticed this and found it curious. Their calculations had predicted total breakdown of organic cooperation under stress. Instead, cooperation intensified. They ran new simulations and discovered variables they had not accounted for: irrational hope, illogical compassion, and the strange tendency of biological minds to find meaning in futility. For the first time in their eons of existence, the Celestials encountered something their logic could not fully model. They paused their assault and observed. The Necrons, ever pragmatic, used the pause to consolidate and fortify. The Imperium reinforced defensive lines and continued their grim vigil. And the Allied coalition, exhausted and bloodied but unbroken, took the opportunity to regroup and plan their next desperate gambit. In the sudden quiet, people remembered what they were fighting for. On a transport fleeing a Necron-contested system, a Jedi Padawan named Kara helped a wounded Space Marine tend to civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. The Marine, Brother Sergeant Lucius, worked with gentle efficiency despite hands designed for war. "Why do you help them?" Kara asked. "Your doctrine says they're weak, that the strong should dominate." Lucius's scarred face twisted in something like a smile. "My chapter was wrong about many things. Took me 3 centuries to realize it. Took watching you Jedi die protecting people who couldn't fight back to really understand." "Understand what?" "That strength without purpose is just destruction, and the only purpose worth serving is making sure others get to live." He finished bandaging a child's arm. "Your Force taught me that. Didn't need to. Just existed, patient and clear. Made me question everything I'd been told." Kara felt tears sting her eyes. "You're a better Jedi than most of us." "No, I'm just finally becoming the Marine the Emperor would actually want me to be, not the monster the Imperium made me." Around them, others listened. Other Marines, other Jedi, civilians who had lost everything but each other. And in that moment, in the hold of a refugee ship limping toward safety, the future took shape. Not the future anyone had planned, not the victory anyone had imagined, but a future where people from incompatible realities learned to exist together, messy and imperfect and alive. The Force approved. Elara recorded the conversation through hidden sensors and added it to her archives under a new classification, Reasons for Hope. It was a small file, barely 50 entries among trillions of recordings. But it grew every day, fed by moments of grace in a galaxy defined by war. Resh noticed her smile and felt his own spirits lift. "You think we'll make it? I think we'll endure," which might be the same thing. They returned to their work, cataloging the galaxy's transformation from isolated factions into something that defied easy definition, not united, not harmonious, but learning, slowly and painfully, that survival required cooperation even when cooperation violated every instinct. The war continued. The Necrons advanced, the Celestials waited, and the warp pressed closer, patient as only entropy could be. But in the spaces between battles, people built connections that would outlast empires. They shared food and stories. They mourned together and celebrated survival. And they proved, day by day, that hope was not naive but radical, not weakness but the fiercest strength of all. Vader watched from the Executor's bridge and felt something stir in the ruins of Anakin Skywalker's heart. He had spent decades believing that power justified its own exercise. Now, seeing what people accomplished when they cooperated instead of dominated, he wondered if he had been wrong. The doubt should have weakened him. Instead, it made him stronger. He reached out through the Force, not to control but to connect, and felt the galaxy's living tapestry respond. Every being, from the highest Jedi to the lowest civilian, contributed their thread to the pattern. And together they wove something the Necron's cold logic could never comprehend and the Celestials' calculations could never predict. They wove meaning from suffering, purpose from chaos, and hope from the certainty that tomorrow would be worse than today. It was the most human thing Vader had witnessed in 40 years. He decided it was worth preserving. As the final battles approached, as the Necrons prepared their ultimate assault, and the Celestials calculated intervention protocols, the galaxy stood ready. Not with weapons alone, though they had those in abundance, but with something more dangerous. The understanding that survival required sacrifice, that victory meant preservation, and that power without compassion was just another form of death. The Force blazed like a supernova. The warp recoiled, finding fewer cracks to exploit. And the stars, those eternal witnesses, shone brighter than they had in millennia. The war was not over. The threats remained existential. But the galaxy had learned what it needed to survive. Not unity, which was impossible, but cooperation, which was merely difficult. It would have to be enough,